Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 291 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which also happens to be the first episode of 2022. So if you are listening more or less at the time of release, Happy New Year. I hope the year brings you whatever you wanted to bring us, to bring you, even to bring us. I am the director of Virtual Not Distant, the company behind this show. And in today's episode, I am delighted to be joined for the, fourth, fifth time by Marcus Wermuth, who is now the senior lead engineer at the company Wermuth. And this is what he's going to be talking to us about, actually his transition into that role, what it meant for him as a person, what it's like to switch roles from one fully distributed company where he was before Buffer to Wermuth, again, fully distributed company, what the mindset shifts were, if any, what it felt like, what it looked like. So I think for me, it's a perfect topic, obviously, for the first episode of the new year. Just to let you know, we've got the information about what Virtual Not Distant does, the training for remote managers. It's all on our website under services. And of course, our resources section, which has the blog posts. It's got all the show notes for all the episodes, which they are blog posts in themselves. So if you don't feel like listening a lot to podcasts, just look through our show notes because you will get a lot of some of the insights that we come up with during those conversations and also just a feel for what the conversations are like. So we will start now. We'll go straight into the conversation with Marcus. And, I always wonder about whether I'm pronouncing people's names and surnames correctly. So Marcus is okay with me calling him Marcus Wermuth, but I thought he might also tell you how he pronounces it.
Hey, I'm glad to be here again. And you know what? The pronunciation is perfect. I like the English pronunciation, so it's all fine.
I'm going to put you in a compromise. Can you tell us the original pronunciation so that listeners can make up their mind how they want to pronounce your name when they talk about you?
Well, I think it's all about the last name, and it's Wermuth in German. But you know what? With the TH, Wermuth is fine too.
Great. Good. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for thank you for being so nice about it all. I am terrible for sometimes. So Marcus, now we met and you've recorded a few times with us. You were part of a roundtable. You were part of the Connection and Disconnection in Remote Team series in 2019. And I've just followed how you work and what you do and stuff. And relatively recently, you swapped jobs in the distributed space. So I thought it'd be interesting to hear what that is like. Of course, I'll ask you to give a bit of context because it was still during a pandemic. I think not during the mega lockdown, but it's still interesting times to be swapping. So do you want to start by telling us what you were doing and what you moved into, just for context?
Yeah, totally. I can do that. The context of the pandemic is always helpful, but as you might know, working remotely, there isn't too big of a change. It's not that I had to switch offices, but we'll get into that. Before August, I was at Buffer for quite a while. And I think for people in my industry or our industry, being at the company for 6 years is quite a long time. So I started at Buffer in 2015. Started there as an engineer and then grew into management, and that's the topic we've been talking about most here on the show. And lastly, I've been kind of managing multiple teams at Buffer. I was a senior engineering manager, helping out with various things when it came to, engineering teams, engineering leadership, and all those kind of things. And what I moved into, and we can go into the details there, is an engineering manager role here at remote.com. I always add the .com because, talking about remote work, it always feels a bit weird to say
Yes.
I work at remote, but yeah, that's the name of the company. And I'm managing currently 5 teams, soon a bit more, which is not the standard, but we're still hiring and filling various roles, doing similar things, helping with engineering leadership and bringing my expertise that I had in the past 6 or 5 years around engineering leadership into the company.
Mhm. And that's another bit of context that I want to just pull out is the fact that remote.com is growing a lot.
Yes.
And definitely when you joined, I think they just got some round of funding. We had Natalia, it's Natalia, not her first name. You see, I always get all the names wrong. Vatalidis. I
No
learned
worries.
I learned to pronounce her surname. Nadia. Was it Nadia?
I think it's Nadia, yeah.
Yeah, Nadia, yeah. We had Nadia Vatalidis talking in the show, and then very soon after that, they got some a round of funding, and then you joined them a few months ago. So that a very different context as well. So, so what was the switching like? I mean, we talked about there's no offices, but what did it entail? What were you, how was it facilitated by the company? What did you do in your brain? I mean, I've got so many questions, but let's just start. What did that look like for you start a new job?
Yeah, honestly, I think a lot happened just in my head and virtually because not a lot has changed outside of that. It was, and I wrote about this, it was a very, I don't want to say weird, but different experience, like I have to be honest, I never really switched like a job in that either that high of a level or in
Mm.
general, because before Buffer I was a freelancer, right? You work with a lot of different clients, so you're used to that. But then Buffer was like a long period of my work life, and then switching that was different. I mean, you build relationships in a company, you started to get used to certain things, right? So it was definitely a bit weird to me. So it happened, I think, also when we had a quiet time at Buffer, like it was a week where we were all slowing down, kind of, not having a lot of calls. So that's the moment where I decided to change companies. And I don't know, it was weird because the biggest thing that I did was exiting out of a Slack and the next week getting into a new Slack, right? Like that was the main thing. There was things that happened around this, like emails and conversations, but the biggest thing is like getting your card box and pulling it out of your office into another office, right? Like that was the moment where everything happened. So you go out of the Slack on this Friday or Thursday, and then it's done, right? There was nothing happening, no confetti, no fanfares or nothing. It was like, okay, I go into the weekend. On Monday, I'm in a different Slack and in a different company, and everything changes basically.
I want to pick up on that because that's something I hadn't thought of, that actually visually for you going into a discussion space was the same.
Yeah.
That really does my head in from one day to another because, well, I don't know, the visual stuff if we are in an office or if we're moving our workspace, that helps. But actually, yes, was it visually different though? Could you tell, like, was the dynamic different, or actually it looked pretty much the same? Because I'm assuming here stuff.
What do you mean by visual? Like
So what was on your screen with the Slack,
yeah.
was it configured differently? Did the dynamics look different? I don't know. Maybe you didn't. Maybe, that's probably the last thing you were paying attention to.
I mean, the good thing about it is I got a new setup, and I'm using a managed computer from the company, so I got a new setup that kind of made it okay. I have to switch this out now. So there was a little transition period that I had to change, like the hardware of it, but the software basically is the same. I put everything, all the apps up that I needed, that I had before. The Slack in hyphens the Office looks the same, although there's a different logo and a lot more people in there, but
Mhm.
the general behavior is the same. So that's, to me, was actually a good thing. Like, going a bit more into the detail, that
Mhm.
the culture of the companies were quite similar. I wouldn't say the same, but quite similar. And the company was started by people that also had a lot of remote work experience even before the pandemic, right? So it's coming into a company that was already set up really well, a lot of professionals having built out their workflows and processes, right? So it felt welcoming, and there wasn't a lot that I had to learn because I was coming already into a thing that I knew how it would work. Of course, a lot to read, a lot to understand, but in general, the logistics and the kind of behavior was very similar. I was working at the company remotely before, doing so now. I'm seeing it differently. People that have only maybe worked in the pandemic remotely, or are just coming into a remote job. They, of course, they need to adapt. They need to learn all the things. How does it work? Async versus sync, Zoom calls. Oh, how can I book a meeting with you? There's a lot you have to learn. So the energy for me that I had to spend going into this new job wasn't really high when it came to learning the tools and the processes.
Mhm. Because I suppose both companies either were set up fully distributed from the beginning or they switched really, really early on.
Yeah. Oh, they were all. I
They
think
were both.
Buffer were at the beginning, were like when they were like 5 or 6, they were in
Mm.
an office. But yeah, very early on, distributed and remote. The name says it, was
Mm.
started like a fully distributed company right from the get go. So that, of course, adds to it.
Mhm. I think that's also an interesting thing to be looking out for when switching jobs is that degree of how the company was born, what the remote means in the company, and as you say, just to start to suss out what the feel might be like. Excellent. Now, the other thing I wanted to pick up on is when you were talking about leaving the previous company and the relationships, I felt a little bit of a sadness of leaving something behind. How was that? Because you're not in touch with your old colleagues every day, maybe as you were, or you were saying that maybe the touch points were slowing down a bit, but there's still a computer space away. How does that feel different?
Yeah, so I think that was the toughest part. It wasn't really switching jobs. It was more around the relationships on both sides, and I would love to get into both sides. So leaving relationships is difficult because, I mean, yes, we're almost the same Slack message or email away that we were before, but everyone is on their own schedules. And
Mm.
the people I work with, they were in, Canada, Singapore, India, UK, like all across the world. And time zones, as we know, aren't a big helper in that. So I work normally, my work hours from the morning till the afternoon. And then on top of that, having to remember to chat to people that are on different time zones, right? It makes it all a bit tricky because you're already busy in those times, maybe with other calls. So that was a really tough thing. And I think you need to be very mindful of like keeping those relationships, and also understand that maybe you don't hear with a friend that you had in your last workplace. You won't hear yourself with them or talk to them every day, but maybe once a month or once a week, and that's okay because there's two lives, right, that are happening on two different times. So it's very tough to keep those relationships going, because before you might jump on a call that was work related and you would chat, right? Or you would have a one-on-one with someone that you really had a close relationship with. So those moments were a bit easy. You were in the same Slack, you could just send a message and it was okay to hang out because you will want to work together and talk about work, but maybe also talk a little bit about life. So all of that made it a tiny bit easier. And if people then that you build relationships with also change company, then it becomes even more trickier, right? So
Yes.
that was a really tough thing, and something I realized, that it's hard to keep relationships across the globe, or friendships across the globe, like going, like
Mm.
that's a whole big topic that I realized. Like, it's tough to keep chatting to someone in Singapore all the time because they are on their time, I'm on my time. I can't visit them for coffee tomorrow, right? So that became, or for me, is really a concern, like realizing this now in the pandemic. Like, I don't have a lot of friends around me here because they are all everywhere else and I
Yes.
can't travel, right? So
Yeah.
that was a tough thing for me. And then on the same side, like going into a new company, like you have zero relationships, or maybe one or two that people joined that you knew, but especially the management or peer relationships, like being at the company for 6 years, they knew me. They knew how I would work. They knew where I wanted to go. Like my manager, they would know, she would understand, okay, this is an opportunity for Marcus, that's something we can give him. Like they would know when I write something, how I mean it or how I function, right? And now going into a new company, like because the switch was so immediate and I didn't even take a break, but the switch was like almost the same. I was feeling a little bit, oh wow, I need to build the relationship again. I need to prove myself again. I need to tell them this is me, this is how I work. I need to build this relationship with my manager, understand how he works. Same thing, for me, telling them how I work, how where I want to go, and things like that. So it became really like the first few weeks were really tough for me on that front.
Well, there's so much in there, Marcus. Thank you very much. And regular listeners and people who've been in the distributed/remote space will probably be nodding and maybe not too surprised to hear how tough it can be emotionally to leave a company, even though you have never sat next to these people for, I don't know if you ever sat next to them. Did you ever meet in person your previous team?
Yeah, of course.
You did?
Most
Yeah.
of them, except there's one person that I'm still kind of close with that I haven't met yet. So from
you
the
see.
past company.
And I think this is really important for newcomers to the space to hear, and it's that it can happen. Like really strong relationships are built. I mean, that everything is different; it's not the same. But I think it's a really important thing to be remembering, and how also when you're welcoming someone into a company as well, just at the beginning, there can be still that sense of grief and loss from the other person, especially if it has been like from one day to the other. So taking it then into where you left off, that going into the company, how did you approach finding out who was who, what you needed to communicate and what not? You're already talking about, oh, these people don't know me.
Yeah.
How did you approach all of that?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I prepared for that a lot. I think the main thing that I did was to just be open and curious, go into it with everything that I could, and just find out more about the people that I would work with. Right? I booked coffee chats with the team, what we call like just quick, Zoom calls. I also planned. There was a lot of planning from the people team at Remote too. They had the first week is dedicated to your onboarding, learning more about the company and other things, and there's a lot of guidance, like rough guidance, which I really loved. Like the whole process was really really good to get into it, and then the same thing with like getting to know people. It's like you start to just find out or have touch points with people that you notice in Slack, and then you say, "Oh, this is a person I could chat with." At the numbers we're at right now, over 600 people, it's hard to chat to everyone. So that's something I'm never going to be able to do. But yeah, I think being open, being curious, just going into it and asking questions. I think my coaching training helped me a bit there of just being curious about the other person, and kind of engaging it that way.
Yeah, and that when you're bringing in your coaching training into it, there's also quite a, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, quite a deliberate nature, a deliberate approach to how we ask questions as coaches as well, to make sure that we get as much information from the other person, or that we open up the conversation as much as possible. Were you deliberate in that? Like, did you ask lots of how and what and open questions, or actually, no, it's just you just went in with your curiosity and went, let's find out about this person?
Yeah, it's more of the curiosity. Sometimes, you have that other person that you seemingly notice they don't ask any questions back, and you're the one kind of steering the conversation. So that's what I used. I just kind of was going into it very curious, very openly, like the same thing I did before at the other company or in general, because I know virtual video calls can be tricky, And funnily enough, we were talking just before this call about our backgrounds and the blurring, right? And sometimes
Yeah.
even just asking a person around, oh, I see this book or this thing in your background, and then suddenly they lighten up and start to chat. So that's kind of the thing I use to build some of the newer relationships.
Yeah, nice. So, have you had a chance to go beyond, to meet people beyond your teams? Because you're looking after 5 teams, you said. Is that
At the
how does it
moment,
work?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, have you had a chance to be able to approach people outside of that immediate circle?
Yeah, so a little just a rough idea of like what the hierarchy, although it's a loose hierarchy, is. Like I'm not managing the engineers and teams, I'm managing the engineering team leaders,
Yes.
which are engineering managers, and I'm more of like a manager of managers or lead of leads to a certain extent. So at that point, of course, like with the experience I had with past engineering teams, I know that building a first team mindset, chatting to other EMs that are next to me, to the VP, to customer support, to people team, like all those things, I'm always trying to reach out. Of course, there's certain areas where I never like got into, like probably I haven't chatted to a lot of people in our legal department, because it
Hmm.
wasn't needed. So there's definitely blind spots in like the whole amount of people that we have that I haven't talked to, and that maybe it will take a while. We have some, things set up in our all hands where people just randomly get mixed together. We have coffee chats where people just sometimes book a call with me, but I mean that comes all on top of your general work, so you have to balance that too, of like doing your work and then finding time to do coffee chats or other kind of social activities.
And the difficult thing when you're working remotely is that everything is done through the computer.
Yeah.
And so you need time away from the computer as well, because obviously if you're a knowledge worker in a co-located organization, then you can do some stuff, you do most of your tasks in the computer, but then you can do some of the relationship building away from it. But here, how did you find it? You must have been exhausted at the beginning of the change going into it, or not?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, exhausted because of all the new impressions and the
Yes.
concerns of like, oh no, I have to start from zero here. But less so about like being exhausted for calls. I mean, it wasn't new to me. I knew, like, even at Buffer at the company before, there were new people coming in, of course, much less than here. But I still jumping on calls with others and building relationships. So it wasn't new to me. And I know, I mean, I've been working remotely for the last 10 or 11 years. So, being a good citizen, being a good master of your own schedule, I know that that is key, right? So, my new puppy helped and like giving me good routines of like going out in the morning, going out at lunch, going out in the evening, always kind of having a moment where you shut down, right? Having a work laptop if you can, or if the company allows to, is great because all the work stuff is just on that, right? So I knew what I was getting into, so I wasn't really exhausted by, that part.
Excellent. And something that you wrote some time ago, and I don't know whether it was a post on LinkedIn or what, but you were talking about developing your external network as well. I remember once, I don't know if you wrote it or you shared it on a podcast, that you'd actually reached out to see if anyone wanted to just meet up, just from your network, just to chat. How did you use, actually, let me ask that first. Did you use your external network during this time at all, or pretty much you were able to just focus on the company? And I don't know, I'm also curious about what role our online external networks might play when we switch jobs.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure which post you're referring to, but that's fine. I think I definitely used my network to like find a new job. That is definitely a benefit of having like a good network in the industry, or like at peers that are in similar roles, right? That you can always kind of chat to. So I think that is always a big help in that. And other than that, I'm not sure I used it that much. I mean, it's always good. And what I'm seeing already now, what I'm always also telling people is having people outside of a company that is maybe in a similar job or, roughly related is always very helpful, because you tend to just bog down in this one problem, and you start to, just see this thing. And if you connect to people outside of that, maybe you get another perspective. So I think the network is always healthy. Again, it comes back to the relationship thing of, can you actually connect with all the people all the time? If they are in different time zones, so that comes back into it. But I think for the change of the job, yeah, I used it for a certain amount, to find opportunities and stuff like that. So it was helpful to that extent.
Mhm. Nice, thank you. So I wanted to maybe wrap up, and we'll see where it takes us, by asking you, you're a great learner, as in you really take charge of your own learning, and you write a lot about learning as well. What have you learned about yourself through the process?
What have I learned about myself?
Yes. Or did anything surprise you, or were you reaffirmed about some stuff of how you approach the whole switch?
Yeah, I think the first one, less about me, but in general about
Mm.
jobs. And I
Hmm.
think I wrote about this realization that when I tell people, they're like, oh, yeah, this really makes sense. But it's something very basic is that, offices, when we change offices, it's very tough for us to change jobs when we are in an office because we build our life around an office, right? We choose an apartment close to it. Um, I don't know, our kids will go to schools or kindergartens that are close to this. You go shopping close to this, right? It's always like I move to a new city, I have to find a new job. It's always connected to that. But with remote work, like I can build my life wherever I want to and still change jobs. So that realization of like I'm building not my life around my work, but kind of I put my work into my life where it fits, kind of really connected with this like experience, although we all know it somehow, right? So that was one big realization. And I think the other part is probably around the being intentional to connect with friends and peers or those relationships that I mentioned, that it's really tough, not having them like in the same city or in your neighborhood where you could just have a coffee with them. I think that became a big realization. Although I knew it, it became a big realization of like, oh wow, and I'm leaving a lot behind, and it's very tough to like connect with them. So I think that was the biggest thing, and the same thing, of course, then going into a company that as a leader, something we never learn, we never really like it's just put on our plate, but we never really learn it, is building those relationships from new. Like we read about it, there's 1,000 books, but it's not a skill, as probably many others in knowledge as knowledge workers. Um, Relationship building isn't something we like get trained in or learn. So there's people that are more extroverted, people that are more introverted. So that realization of like having to do this in your own style kind of was a big learning for me.
It really is the most experiential kind of learning, relationship building, because until you are there actively doing it and figuring it out, yes, you can take information from here and there. Like I'm sure lots of people listening to you can go, actually, I hadn't thought of that, or I hadn't thought of doing that. But actually, until you're there doing it, it's very difficult to learn, as you say. Personality and everything comes into it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally.
So so something that I remember now that you mentioned about the office, and it's interesting that having that location can either help or hinder us sometimes. As you were talking, I was thinking actually sometimes it's easier to make a change if we change location. Other times it might be more difficult, and then all the things that you hadn't realized that you would lose or let go of. And I remember when I first spoke to you in episode 188 in January 2019 was the episode that we released. You spoke about that yes, you were the house actually was what's stable. Your flat where you
Yeah.
lived, sorry, your home was stable. You went into something else, but actually the fact that the home is stable can actually provide that little bit of stability, as opposed to if we're moving jobs, moving people, and also moving building, moving area, because you get used to going for coffee in the same places and stuff like that, and then suddenly to switch.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, imagining that I had to switch a company and switch city, move to another city, find a new apartment, like find my way around, but like, furnishing a new apartment, then going into a new office. Like I know I'm coming from a very, very privileged perspective, but a lot of people still do this, and it's frightening. There's a lot of stress involved in that. So what I want to say with this is, yes, I'm coming from a privileged perspective, but I think people need to understand that remote work, enables us to like be less stressed when it comes to those kind of things too.
Yeah, and I really hope again that that is something that starts to gain a little bit of weight in the conversations around remote work, and because it's still not just about working from home. It's about giving the person, you mentioned this earlier, giving them some sense of control also over their lives. Like if you decide to change jobs, you don't have to change your life. And I think this is still missing, is this real understanding that if we do have the opportunity to do something that's not location specific, it can make people's lives a lot easier as well, and not always, like you say, always have to carry our personal lives into our job or work decisions as well.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I think the pandemic, as bad as it is, changed the perspective on less why we should do it to more the how. And I think we're starting to realize like all the benefits and maybe even, disadvantages to it, but the benefits of like the economic influence, the urban planning part, like, people not having to move close to a center, like spacing it more. Like there's so many connected things that I'm not even able to talk about because I'm not an expert and I haven't thought about it. I think that's pretty insane. And then working for a company now, that their goal is to help everyone across the globe to be like properly employed with benefits and making this available to literally everyone. I don't know, this closes the circle for me.
That's great. And of course, I didn't ask you what remote did. I just went ahead. But anything you want to add about what you just said about the company does, or you explained it beautifully.
Yeah, I think there's probably things you could go into detail. Maybe people already know. You can check it out on the website, remote.com. But I think the biggest thing is we want to help people get employed across the globe. Like from everything that relates to that employment, right? Like that goes into onboarding a company and offboarding and all the things in between, like everything that relates to that. That's what we want to make possible for basically the whole world.
Yeah, great! What an amazing purpose, Marcus. Now let's close the interview. I mean, it's so nice to talk to you always. It's so easy. So now I don't know how much you want to tell listeners about the book that you are writing or not, and also you have a newsletter. So if listeners want to know more about you and your work, what should they sign up for?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So yes, my website, marcuswermuth.com, my full name. You can sign up for the newsletter I'm sending out every week. And next week, I'm actually going to release not the full book. I'm not done yet, as work is busy, but I'm releasing the first 3 chapters as a beta release. So it's gonna, not be the most edited version yet, but I'm putting it out there for the people that signed up and bought it, the early release version on my website. So there's also a page beyondavatarsbook.com, but you find this also on my website. So if you're interested in that, you can check it out there, and I'm always happy to chat. So if you're on my website, just find me on social media, and I'm happy to talk to you.
The title of the book is Beyond Avatars?
Yes, Beyond Avatars, Making Virtual Leadership More Human.
Excellent. Well, I won't ask you to explain what it's about because the subtitle says it all. Marcus Wermuth, sorry, I tried to pronounce your name. Marcus Wermuth, it's wonderful, wonderful to have you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Pilar.
Well, I am so lucky to have a podcast that can bring people in to talk about what they do, and actually that we can have some regular guests as well, because I think it's quite interesting to see how people evolve. Even someone who has been for so long in the distributed space like Marcus, he's also got this evolution of how he works, all these realizations. He's probably changed a lot as a person. I mean, I could have asked him that, but I didn't think of that while I was talking to him, because he's been in the space for so long. And of course, as people, we evolve, our experiences change us. So we did record that conversation on the 7th of December, 2021. So go to his website if you're interested in his book, beyondavatars.com, I think he said it was, and check out where he's at with the book. He might have released it already by the time you are listening to this. Who knows? And that's all from me today, my dear listeners. I'm recording this straight after talking to Marcus. Remember that if you want to check out the show notes, if you're listening to this on an app, you can go to virtualnotdistant.com, go to resources, podcasts, and all the show notes are there with all the links, etc. If you're not subscribed to our show, you can do so on any app. We are everywhere. And if you can't find us let me know. My email address is pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. And also, if you go to our website, you can sign up to our newsletter and you can download a free PDF all about asynchronous communication. So lots of goodies everywhere. Thank you very, very much for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Orti, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.